Here are my 5 biggest tips for making monsters. Keeping combat engaging and interesting with fresh monsters is very important. Some of your veteran players are extremely aware of what all kinds of monsters can do, and they probably can't help but metagame. Using some of these simple tips and tricks, I can help you provide a new and fun experience for all of your players. But the first step is figuring out why you just aren't using the monster manual. Okay, tip number 1 to upgrading your encounters is figuring out which monster is right for which encounter. This is especially helpful when you're trying to include certain types of monsters for your story plot. Maybe you've got a certain kind of monster that you want for a certain fight scene or a certain type of story device that you're trying to deliver. You have a type of encounter in your head, but it's just not quite delivered in the monster manual stat blocks. In most of these cases, you want this monster to be very specific to this encounter, and maybe it's a boss battle. And boss battles tend to be pretty epic, so you want to make sure you adjust their stats and their abilities accordingly. Is this encounter playing a role in the story that means your monster needs certain abilities to really sort of wrap up this encounter in a nice and interesting way? Perhaps they attack part of the scenery and they try and split the party. Something like this can be very easy to achieve by simply using the environment, but also your monster might have some kind of special siege attack that it can create to deliberate or prohibit the party from doing some other kind of action. Is this monster somehow related to another monster that's coming up soon that you want to foreshadow a little bit? Or is this monster polymorphed from another creature that perhaps the party knows? Do they slay or save the monster? These are just a couple of tips, of course, on why certain monsters might have some new abilities. They also might give you a reason for why that monster is in this area. Which leads me exactly into tip number 2. What monsters live here? Your party might simply be in the wrong or right place at the wrong or right time. The area your party is adventuring through can really easily be used as a way to determine what kind of monsters they will encounter. Swamps are filled with both creatures that lurk in the water and walk on the land. A forest might have creatures adapted to climbing and swinging through the trees. Mountainous rocky terrain might have creatures that have hard, rock-like shells on them. You can see where I'm going with this. When you think about creating an encounter in an environment, look at the environment that the players are in, and then try and discern some of the abilities that the creature might have for living in that environment. Remember, survival of the fittest is real when it comes to monsters, so give them abilities that are appropriate for them to do so. That's assuming these monsters are native to the area, of course. Remember, something like having extra arms or limbs might really be influenced heavily by a creature that lives in the dark and needs to touch and sense its way around. It could whip its tongue out to grab things in the dark, or swing itself from trees. It could have blades for arms. There's tons of different things you can think of for the environment that creature might live in. And remember, a good place to start is to look at actual real-life animals, see how they've adapted to their surroundings. Okay, my third tip is, well, this should be the first tip really, but it's where do I start? If you're really unsure about what kind of monster you might want to have, simply browse through the monster manual and find something that you think looks cool. This is where you can start to adjust that monster and tweak it to fit the level of your party and also the type of encounter that you want to have. The key here is sort of not really worrying about scaling at the beginning. It's more the theme and the types of abilities that you want the monster to have that you should start thinking about first. If you need to upgrade its damage, its hit points, its armor class, its saving throws, all these things are very malleable, and you should be able to look at your party makeup and determine just how much damage they can do and how much damage you want to do to them with this one monster. Also, use the monster's physiology in a sense to determine how you might upgrade some of these stats. Is it a very big and muscular creature? You might want to give it more hit points, or you might even want to give it more damage when it attacks physically. Has it got armor plating like an armadillo or something else? Maybe up its AC. Does it have some other kind of ability where perhaps when it's attacked it releases a toxin? You could make the saving throw for this toxin higher, or you could make its damage or its potential condition a little more dangerous. Is it faster or more agile? It could move around the battlefield a lot quicker. Could also possibly disengage as some kind of bonus action. Now, this is fairly easy when you're scaling up monsters, but when you're trying to find something to scale back down, it becomes a little bit more difficult. I would suggest looking at a weaker creature that you know the party can fight by simply picking something at random, and then scaling the stats relative to that encounter. Remember, your custom monsters should be able to use actions, bonus actions, and reactions. You want them to have all these 3 different types of things because they make the encounter more engaging and also they make your monster more unique. This brings me to tip number 4. What kind of abilities should they actually have? Hey guys, remember me? Yeah, I'm the guy from the video you're watching. I also have a Patreon that you can go and check out. It's patreon.com/criticalmits. You can also find me everywhere at Critical Mits on all socials. I've got some cool stuff I've cooked up for the DMs Guild. You can go and check that, links down below. Remember, joining my Patreon is free if you join as a free member. There's tons of cool stuff that comes out every single month. I've got maps, monsters, and magic items, as well as tips, tricks, and other things in my blog posts. Don't forget, like and subscribe. Back to the video. So when we're designing monsters for an encounter and we're deciding what kind of abilities they have, we don't really want them to be too strong or too weak. We want to find that really nice sweet spot. But most of the time, that sweet spot comes down to one specific thing. Why do they have this ability? What is this monster's goal for this combat? Are they there to slay the party? Or are they there as a plot device to try and move them through a certain area or give them a hint of something coming? Does this monster simply doing more damage mean that the party have to spend more resources or more time to rest when they're in a hurry? Is this monster so fast that it actually gets away from the party and they have to follow it through a certain mysterious and dangerous path? Or is it an easy encounter that's supposed to throw the players off guard? Or are some of these abilities simply just to make combat smoother or more fun? A good example I could give is perhaps there's an ooze that the party is fighting. Yes, an ooze, I know. I don't know. Look, I chose this one because I like oozes. I liked gnolls before, now I like oozes. But imagine an ooze has the ability to be extremely slippery. This means it can get out of grapples very easily. But perhaps this ooze is sliding down a hill and slowly encroaching a small animal that the players like at the bottom of the hill. And you know if it gets there, that animal is going to be absolutely gobbled up and there's no way to get it out. Well, the players are going to try and stop it. How? By grappling, maybe. Or a net. These new thematic abilities that you're going to give to your creatures can give them something really, really fun and interesting for that one encounter that the players will never forget. And the next time they come across that same monster, they'll just assume that it has this silly ability that you gave it for one encounter. But maybe it doesn't. Maybe it has something extra or something new or something evil. Okay, this is tip number 5, and this is all about scaling. Now, this is going to get a bit number crunchy, and some of it is a little bit vague, but hold on tight, we'll get you through to the end, trust me. Now, this heavily depends on what kind of encounter you want this to be, whether it's easy, medium, hard, deadly, or some kind of boss encounter. You really need to pick that before you start choosing what kind of creatures you want for your encounter. I'm going to mostly focus on the idea of a boss battle here because we often use these customized creatures for epic moments in our campaigns. First, you need to figure out just how much damage you want this creature to do in one round of combat. Now, this is including the fact that you might give it legendary actions to give it turns off of the turn order. So you really want to consider just how much HP your party has and how much you can play around with that. You should also consider just how much damage the players can do in one round of combat to the creature itself. Its AC and its HP will really come into effect here because the higher AC it has, the harder it'll be for melee combatants to hit it, but that doesn't mean it will take any less damage in one round of combat. Depending on your party makeup, you could have a lot of spellcasters and you need to tweak this accordingly. Honestly, it's better to kind of overestimate than underestimate in these circumstances. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a couple of tips and tricks for encounters at all the different levels. But remember, the difficulty of an encounter isn't always how long it takes. It could simply be just how much damage, pain, and suffering the party takes before the end of the combat. Okay, so here we have a hard encounter. Ideally, you should give your monster enough HP to last around 6 to 7 rounds of combat. This could sometimes feel like a slog, but adjust the monster's HP accordingly. Next, we'll talk about its AC and saves for a hard encounter. These don't need to be particularly high, but your monster should have a decently good time at trying to save against everything. But remember, its saves shouldn't all be high. The saves should be based on what kind of creature it is. So if it's a very physical monster, it could have a high dex, con, and strength. If it's a very highly intelligent creature, it could have a high intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. And here, I find it more fun for the monster to fail saves and perhaps have some legendary resistances to really get your players' hopes up. And also, letting your players hit more often makes it more fun for the players in general. The more they miss, the more they'll get frustrated, and even if they hit and take off a chunk of hit points, it's still scary. Okay, so monster output for a hard encounter, you want to be aiming to do roughly half of the average player's hit points in one round of combat. So if the average party hit points is 50, you want to be doing roughly 25 points of damage in one combat. Now that's granted that you hit with all of your attacks, you might not, and that's fine too. But you should be aiming to hit 25 hit points. You basically want to be able to knock down one character about half the hit points in one round. This doesn't mean it has to be with one attack, it could be over multiple attacks, and you don't always have to attack the same target, but you should be doing this much damage spread around or focused depending on the type of encounter. Now my big bonus tip here is definitely use legendary actions for these harder encounters. This will dramatically step up the difficulty in your players' minds when they see the monster attacking more frequently, although that doesn't necessarily mean it will do more damage. But it does give your monster a good chance, if it's highly intelligent enough, to keep attacking one creature and try and knock them unconscious, if that's what it seems like the best option for that creature would be to do. Okay, so dialing it back to a medium encounter, we want to shift that length from 6 to 7 rounds of combat back down to 4 to 5. Again, we want to balance our AC and saves so that the players are hitting more than 50% of the time, and our HP should roughly be equal to be able to make sure that the combat lasts that 4 to 5 rounds. You still want to push the damage that your monster is going to do to about a third of the average player's HP here. Now this does mean that you could accidentally almost knock out a very squishy character in one hit, but you kind of want to make these hits big, you want to make them very dramatic. This is a medium encounter, but it still should feel like there is some risk to it if the players take too long to get rid of this enemy. A really good way to still make a medium encounter really interesting and engaging is, instead of just having one monster, have a pair that can move around. Okay, now we scale it down even further to an easy encounter. An easy encounter should last between 2 to 3 rounds, making sure all your players get in at least 1 or 2 abilities in this combat. Again, dial back your AC and your saves to make it easier for the party to hit, so they hit at least 50% of the time. But if you've got some players that are rather rambunctious and like to spend a lot of their abilities, then perhaps give your monster a reaction. Your monster damage output here should be a little bit less substantial, but it should still be interesting and engaging by allowing your monster to move further around the battlefield and perhaps take advantage of some of those environmental situations they've been placed in. My real big tip for an easy encounter is this should be a place for your players to show off just how much power they have. Throw lots of little monsters at them and let those little monsters all be standing in a perfect fireball formation. Sometimes you can throw even 2 or 3 of these easy encounters at your party in one session just to make it feel extra epic, that they can just mow down enemies with ease. And remember, scaling is pretty much the hardest thing when it comes to making your own monsters, so try and adjust the HP AC on the fly as best you can. Notice how your players are reacting to how much damage the monster does, and also how much damage they do to the monster. If combat feels like it's dragging because players are rolling poorly, keep going. Players rolling poorly isn't an excuse to simply pull your punches. The players will be much happy that they got out of there just barely, even if it's an easy encounter. Because trust me when I say your players know when you're going easy on them. Speaking of going easy, why don't we talk about some downtime activities?